In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where ancient civilizations rise and fall like cosmic tides, there exists a legend whispered among the stars. For 10 million years, the Void Eater has slumbered, a weapon so powerful it once carved reality itself, so terrifying that entire species chose extinction over facing its wrath. The greatest minds of 1,000 worlds have failed to awaken it. Quantum engineers, plasma theorists, and reality manipulators have all been humbled by its silence. But sometimes the most complex problems require the simplest solutions. Sometimes what the galaxy needs isn't another genius. It's someone who knows how to fix things that are broken. Someone who understands that the most sophisticated machines in the universe still need someone who can get their hands dirty and make them work. The galaxy is about to learn why humans don't just survive. They make everything around them work better. Marcus Chen wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his welding glove, leaving a streak of grime across his weathered face. The industrial station, orbiting Kepler, 442b hummed around him, a symphony of machinery that most people found overwhelming. To Marcus, it was home. He had spent the last 15 years fixing everything from atmospheric processors to quantum drives, earning a reputation as the guy who could make anything work again. The comm unit on his belt crackled to life. "Chen, you've got a priority call on Channel 7. Sounds important." Marcus sighed and set down his plasma torch. He had been in the middle of repairing a malfunctioning life support unit for Sector C, and interruptions always made his work take longer. He switched his comm to Channel 7 and was surprised to hear an unfamiliar voice with what sounded like multiple harmonic overlays. "Human Marcus Chen, this is Ambassador Zix 9 Alpha of the Galactic Technological Council. We require your immediate assistance with a matter of critical importance to all sentient life in this galaxy." Marcus blinked. The Galactic Technological Council was a legendary organization, comprised of the most advanced species in known space. They dealt with technology so complex that most civilizations couldn't even comprehend their basic principles. What could they possibly want with a simple welder from an industrial station? "I think you might have the wrong person," Marcus said into his comm. "I just fix things. Industrial equipment, mostly." There was a pause, followed by what sounded like multiple voices conferring in languages Marcus had never heard. Finally, Ambassador Zix, 9 Alpha spoke again. "We have reviewed your maintenance records extensively, Human Chen. In the past decade, you have achieved a 99.7% success rate in repairs, including 17 instances where you restored functionality to equipment that multiple specialists had declared permanently inoperable." Marcus scratched his head. "Well, yeah, but that's just standard troubleshooting. Most of the time when something doesn't work, it's because someone overcomplicated the repair or missed something obvious." "Precisely why we need you," the ambassador replied. "We have a device that has been non-functional for approximately 10 million standard years. Every known method of technological restoration has failed. We believe your unique approach may be exactly what is required." Despite his skepticism, Marcus found himself intrigued. A device that had stumped the galaxy's best minds for millions of years? That was the kind of challenge he lived for. What kind of device are we talking about? It is difficult to explain in terms your species would understand. What you would call a weapon, though that term is inadequate to describe its true nature. It has the capability to manipulate the fundamental forces of reality itself. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "And you want me to try to fix it? The situation is dire, Human Chen. Our galaxy faces a threat that only this weapon can address. A force from beyond the galactic barrier approaches, one that consumes entire star systems. Without the weapon, all sentient life will cease to exist within the next solar cycle." The weight of those words settled on Marcus like a heavy blanket. All sentient life. Billions of species. Trillions of individuals. His wife Sarah back on Earth. His daughter Emma just starting her first year at engineering school. Everyone and everything he had ever cared about. "All right," he said quietly. "Where do I need to go?" 3 days later, Marcus found himself aboard a ship that defied every law of physics he understood. The vessel seemed to exist in several dimensions simultaneously, and walking through its corridors felt like moving through liquid light. His escort was a being that appeared to be made of crystalline structures that constantly shifted and reconfigured themselves. "I am called Resonance of Ancient Echoes," the being explained as they moved through the ship. "I will serve as your liaison during this endeavor. My species, the Vorth, are the current guardians of the weapon." "How long have your people been guarding it?" Marcus asked, trying not to stare at the way the walls seemed to pulse with their own inner light. "Approximately 2 million years. We inherited the responsibility from the Kethmori, who inherited it from the Silthane before them. The weapon has been passed from the dying hands of one civilization to the next, a burden and a hope combined." They emerged into a vast chamber where dozens of beings from different species worked at control panels that looked more like works of art than technology. At the center of the room stood a holographic display showing their destination, a massive structure orbiting a neutron star, the Nexus, Resonance explained. "Built by the first builders when the galaxy was young. The weapon lies within its core, surrounded by protective systems that have kept it safe but have also prevented any access for the past 3 million years." Marcus studied the hologram. The structure was enormous, easily the size of a small moon, with architecture that seemed to follow patterns his brain couldn't quite process. What exactly went wrong with it? 10 million years ago, it simply stopped. Not damaged, not destroyed, just silent. As if it chose to sleep. Many theories have been proposed. Power failure? Quantum decay? Dimensional displacement? Temporal paradox? None have proven correct. The ship began to decelerate as they approached the Nexus. Through the transparent walls of the observation deck, Marcus could see the ancient structure in all its impossible glory. Spiraling towers twisted through dimensions he couldn't see but somehow felt. Surfaces that reflected light that hadn't been invented yet. Architecture that suggested builders who understood the universe in ways current science couldn't imagine. "Jesus," Marcus whispered. "How old did you say this thing was?" "The Nexus itself predates recorded galactic history." "Teddy, some estimate it at 15 billion years old. Created when the first intelligent species began to understand the deeper laws of reality." As they docked, Marcus felt a strange sensation, as if the station was somehow aware of their arrival. The docking bay they entered was vast enough to hold several of Earth's largest cities, yet it felt intimate somehow, as if it had been designed specifically for this moment. Their escort to the weapons chamber consisted of representatives from 12 different species, each considered among the greatest technological minds of their civilizations. Marcus felt distinctly out of place in his simple work coveralls, carrying a toolbox that looked primitive compared to the exotic devices the others carried. The journey through the Nexus took hours, even with the assistance of internal transport systems that moved them through space in ways that made Marcus's stomach lurch. They passed through chambers filled with machinery that hummed with purposes he couldn't fathom. Corridors lined with displays showing data in languages that had been extinct for millions of years, and vast libraries where crystalline matrices stored the accumulated knowledge of civilizations that had turned to dust before Earth's sun was born. Finally, they reached the core chamber. The weapon itself was nothing like what Marcus had expected. He had imagined something obviously martial, bristling with barrels or focusing arrays. Instead, he found himself looking at what appeared to be a perfect sphere, roughly the size of a basketball, floating in the center of a chamber that seemed to extend infinitely in all directions. The sphere was made of a material that looked like polished obsidian, but reflected light in ways that suggested it existed in more than 3 dimensions. "That's it?" Marcus asked. "Do not let its appearance deceive you," said one of their escorts, a being that looked like a collection of geometric shapes held together by controlled lightning. This device once carved the Void Scar, a rift in space-time that spans 3,000 light-years. It has the power to unmake stars, to reverse entropy itself. Marcus approached the sphere cautiously. As he drew closer, he noticed something the others had apparently missed. Has anyone actually touched this thing? Touch it? Resonance's crystalline structure flickered with what Marcus was beginning to recognize as surprise. That would be extraordinarily dangerous. The energies contained within are completely inert right now, Marcus interrupted. Look, I've been fixing things for a long time, and the first rule is to actually examine what you're working with. He pulled out a simple multimeter from his toolbox. Sometimes the most advanced diagnostic equipment in the galaxy can't tell you what a simple voltmeter can. He approached the sphere and, ignoring the horrified gasps from the assembled scientists, reached out and touched its surface. The moment his fingers made contact, the sphere pulsed with a soft, warm light. Marcus felt a strange sensation, as if the device was somehow scanning him, learning about him. Images flashed through his mind, countless worlds, billions of years of history, the rise and fall of civilizations, and through it all, a sense of patient waiting. "It's not broken," he said suddenly, turning to face the others. "It's just waiting for the right person to wake it up." "Impossible," declared one of the scientists. "We have tried every possible activation sequence, every known form of energy input. But have you tried just asking it nicely?" The silence that followed was so complete that Marcus could hear his own heartbeat. Then Resonance stepped forward, its crystalline structure shifting into what Marcus was beginning to recognize as its expression of confusion. "You believe the weapon requires permission?" Marcus nodded, his hand still resting on the sphere's surface. "It's not just a weapon. It's alive, in some way. Maybe not alive the way we understand it, but it has awareness. It's been waiting all this time for someone to treat it as more than just a tool." He closed his eyes and reached out with his mind, the way he sometimes did when working on particularly complex machinery. "Hello," he said, both aloud and in his thoughts. "I know you've been sleeping for a long time. I know a lot of people have tried to wake you up without asking first. I'm not here to force you to do anything. I'm just here to ask if you'd be willing to help us." The sphere's glow intensified, and suddenly the entire chamber filled with harmonious tones that seemed to resonate in Marcus's bones. The assembled scientists backed away in alarm, but Marcus felt only a sense of welcome, of greeting, of recognition. Words formed in his mind, not heard but understood. Finally, someone who knows the difference between commanding and requesting. The sphere began to rise, its surface rippling like liquid mercury. As it ascended, the chamber around them transformed. The infinite darkness gave way to displays of light that showed the current state of the galaxy, the approaching threat from beyond the galactic barrier, and something else that made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. "You see the danger," the voice in his mind continued. "The devourers return after their long feast in distant galaxies. They come to consume all that lives, all that thinks, all that dreams." The display showed a force unlike anything Marcus could have imagined, a wave of darkness moving between galaxies, leaving behind empty space where once there had been stars and worlds and life. It was vast beyond comprehension, and it was heading directly for their galaxy. "Can you stop them?" Marcus asked. "We can try. But the task requires more than power. It requires understanding, creativity, the ability to find solutions where others see only problems. It requires—" The voice paused, and Marcus felt something that might have been amusement. "It requires someone who knows how to fix things that are broken." The sphere descended back to its original position, but now it pulsed with steady, purposeful light. The Nexus is more than a weapon. It is a workshop, a factory for possibilities. Together, we will build what is needed to protect this galaxy. But first, there is much you must learn. Over the next several hours, Marcus found himself receiving an education in physics and engineering that spanned millions of years of accumulated knowledge. But rather than overwhelming him, the information seemed to integrate naturally with what he already knew. The sphere, which asked to be called Architect, explained that it had been designed to work with minds that thought in practical terms, rather than purely theoretical ones. The first builders understood that the greatest technologies are not those that impress with their complexity, but those that accomplish their purpose efficiently, Architect explained as Marcus learned to interface with the Nexus's systems. You think like they did. You see a problem and focus on solving it rather than on demonstrating your brilliance. Marcus found himself laughing. My engineering professors would be amazed to hear that. I barely passed theoretical physics. The theory without application is mere intellectual exercise, Architect replied. The Devourers were defeated once before, not by the most advanced civilization in their galaxy, but by a species that had barely discovered fire. They succeeded because they saw the problem clearly and crafted a simple, elegant solution. As Marcus worked with Architect to understand the Nexus's systems, he began to see the true scope of what they were dealing with. The station wasn't just a weapon. It was an entire technological ecosystem capable of manipulating matter and energy at the quantum level, of reaching across dimensional barriers, of reshaping reality according to need. But all of this power was useless without direction, without someone who could see through the complexity to identify what actually needed to be done. The other species who tried to activate you, Marcus said as he familiarized himself with what Architect called the reality engine. They all tried to use you like a tool. They saw a weapon and assumed I existed to be aimed and fired, Architect confirmed. They never understood that true power comes not from force, but from precision. From knowing exactly what needs to be changed and changing only that. As their first day of work concluded, Marcus stood in the core chamber, still marveling at what he had stumbled into. The weight of responsibility was enormous. The fate of all life in the galaxy potentially rested on his ability to work with this ancient intelligence to find a solution to an approaching threat beyond imagination. But for the first time in years, he felt truly alive. This was what he had been meant to do, what all those years of fixing broken things had been preparing him for. He wasn't just a welder from an industrial station anymore. He was humanity's representative in a partnership that would either save the galaxy or bear witness to its destruction. Marcus had been working with Architect for 2 weeks now, and every day brought new revelations about both the Nexus and the approaching threat. The Devourers, he learned, weren't just consumers of matter and energy. They were erasers of possibility itself. Wherever they passed, the fundamental laws of physics became simplified, reduced to basic matter consumption, creativity, innovation, even the potential for random evolution. All of it disappeared into their endless hunger. Think of them as cosmic entropy accelerators, Architect explained as they worked on understanding the enemy's approach patterns. They don't just destroy civilizations, they reduce entire regions of space to the most basic possible state of existence. Marcus studied the holographic displays showing the Devourer's path through neighboring galaxies. What struck him wasn't just the scale of destruction, but its thoroughness. It's like they're stripping the universe back to factory settings, he mused. But why? What's the point? That is the question that has puzzled every species that has encountered them, Architect replied. The few survivors who escaped their previous feedings described them as impossibly ancient, perhaps from the early universe when the laws of physics were more flexible. Maybe that's exactly the problem, Marcus said suddenly. Maybe they're trying to get back to that. Maybe they see all the complexity that's evolved in the universe, life, consciousness, technology, as corruption of some original state. Architect's presence in his mind felt thoughtful, an intriguing theory. It would explain their systematic approach. But regardless of their motivation, the practical problem remains. How do we stop a force that has consumed entire galactic clusters? That was the question that had been keeping Marcus awake at night. The Nexus possessed incredible power, but the Devourers were vast beyond imagination. Their advance fleet alone was larger than most solar systems, and preliminary scans suggested they were only scouts for something even more massive following behind. "Show me the previous victory," Marcus said. "You mentioned that someone beat them before." How? The chamber around them shifted, displaying events from billions of years ago. A young galaxy full of primitive civilizations faced the same inexorable advance. Marcus watched as species after species fell, their worlds consumed, their potential erased. But then something unexpected happened. One small world, inhabited by beings that barely qualified as sentient, did something that changed everything. As the Devourers approached their system, these primitive creatures began to sing. Sing? Marcus asked, incredulous. Not merely sing, Architect clarified. They created a resonance pattern that interfered with the Devourers' fundamental process. You see, the Devourers operate by imposing their simplified reality on complex systems. But this species, without understanding what they were doing, created a pattern of such pure randomness and creativity that it acted like noise in the Devourer's signal. Marcus watched as the interference spread. The singing creature's pattern was picked up by others, modified, evolved, until entire regions of space were filled with chaotic but beautiful noise. The Devourers, unable to process their ordered simplification in the face of such creative chaos, withdrew to digest their previous conquests and plan a new approach. But that was billions of years ago, Marcus said. They'll have adapted by now. Precisely. The same solution cannot be used twice. We must find a new form of creative interference, something they cannot predict or counter. Marcus found himself thinking about his years of repair work, about the fundamental principle that had guided his approach to every broken machine. You had to understand not just what was wrong, but why it had gone wrong in the first place. Architect, show me how the Devourers actually consume matter and energy. I want to see the process at the quantum level. The display shifted to show microscopic details of Devourer feeding patterns. Marcus watched as they approached complex molecular structures and began to systematically break them down into simpler forms. But as he studied the process, he noticed something odd. They're not actually destroying information, he said slowly. They're compressing it. Look at these quantum states. The information is still there. It's just been encoded into a more basic form. I fail to see how this helps us, Architect replied. The end result is the same. Complex systems become simple ones. But compression implies that the information can be decompressed, Marcus insisted. If we could find a way to reverse their process, the energy requirements would be astronomical, and the temporal paradoxes alone. No, wait, Marcus interrupted, his excitement growing. What if we don't need to reverse the entire process? What if we just need to create enough random decompression to disrupt their feeding pattern? He began sketching ideas in the holographic workspace, his mind racing. Look, they're like a perfect compression algorithm. But every compression system has weaknesses. If you feed it the right kind of noise, it either fails completely or produces outputs that are larger than the inputs. Architect's presence grew more attentive. Continue. Back home, we used to crash old computer systems by feeding them files that exploited compression vulnerabilities. What if we could create matter patterns that do the same thing to the Devourers? Not try to fight their consumption directly, but make them choke on what they're trying to process. The complexity required would be enormous, Architect warned. We would need to create matter and energy patterns of such intricate randomness that they would overload any processing system, no matter how sophisticated. Can the Nexus do it? The Nexus was designed to manipulate reality itself. Creating complex matter patterns is well within its capabilities. But we would need to understand the Devourer's processing systems in much greater detail. Marcus grinned. Then it's a good thing they're sending scouts ahead of the main fleet. We're going to need to capture one. The next phase of their work took on a completely different character. Instead of preparing to fight the Devourers, Marcus and Architect began designing what was essentially the largest debugging operation in galactic history. They needed to understand exactly how the enemy's consumption process worked, down to the quantum level, so they could exploit its weaknesses. The plan they developed was audacious in its simplicity. Using the Nexus's reality manipulation capabilities, they would create a series of honey traps, complex matter and energy patterns that appeared to be normal planets and star systems but were actually sophisticated test cases. "This is the strangest military strategy I've ever heard of," Resonance commented when Marcus explained the plan to the assembled representatives. "You intend to feed the enemy deliberately? Think of it as a stress test. We're going to find out exactly what it takes to overload their systems." The first honey trap was deployed 3 parsecs from the Nexus, in the path of the approaching Devourer scout fleet. To external sensors, it appeared to be a garden world orbiting a stable star. In reality, it was a carefully crafted puzzle made of exotic matter and energy patterns designed to trigger specific responses in any compression-based processing system. When the Devourer scouts arrived, Marcus and Architect watched from the Nexus as their carefully planned test unfolded. The aliens' approach was methodical, efficient, and initially successful. They began their standard consumption process, breaking down the false planet's matter into simpler forms. But then something unexpected happened. The exotic matter patterns Marcus had woven into the planet's structure began to interact with the Devourer's processing systems in ways that created feedback loops. Instead of simple compression, the aliens found themselves dealing with recursive patterns that grew more complex the more they tried to simplify them. "It's working," Marcus breathed as he watched the data streams. "Look at those energy readings. They're pouring more and more processing power into the planet, but the complexity is increasing faster than they can handle it." The effect cascaded through the scout fleet. Ships that had been efficiently coordinating their consumption patterns began to operate erratically as their processing systems became overloaded. Some attempted to withdraw from the planet entirely, while others seemed locked in endless loops of increasingly frantic consumption attempts. "Fascinating," Architect observed. "Their individual ships appear to share processing resources. By overloading one component of their fleet, we've created systemic instability throughout their entire local network. And that gives us our attack vector," Marcus said, his mind already racing ahead to the next phase. "We don't need to destroy them. We just need to crash their network." But even as they celebrated this initial success, new data was arriving that sobered them quickly. The main Devourer fleet had detected the distress signals from their scouts and was adapting their approach. Backup processing systems were coming online, redundant pathways were being established, and new algorithms were being established to handle complex patterns. "They learn fast," Marcus admitted, studying the incoming intelligence reports. "We've bought ourselves time, but not much. The window of vulnerability is closing." Architect agreed. "If we are to exploit their weaknesses, it must be soon. And it must be comprehensive. A single attack that overloads their entire collective processing system simultaneously." Marcus found himself thinking about the largest repair job he had ever tackled, an entire manufacturing plant that had suffered a cascading system failure. The key hadn't been fixing each broken component individually, but rather identifying the single point of failure that had caused all the others. "We need to find their root process," he said suddenly. "Every complex system has a core function that everything else depends on. If we can overload that, the entire network collapses," Architect finished. "But finding such a thing among beings this ancient and sophisticated, maybe we're overthinking this," Marcus said. "What's the one thing they all have to do, no matter how advanced they are? What's the basic function that every Devourer shares?" The answer came to them simultaneously: consumption itself. Every Devourer, from the smallest scout to the largest fleet node, had to process matter and energy to survive. That core function was so fundamental that it couldn't be made redundant or replaced. It was what made them Devourers in the first place. "If we can create a pattern that crashes their basic consumption process," Marcus said, his excitement growing, "it doesn't matter how many backup systems they have. They all depend on the same fundamental operation." Working together, Marcus and Architect began designing what they privately called the Universal Buffer Overflow, a matter and energy pattern so intricately crafted that any attempt to process it would cause exponential complexity growth in the core consumption algorithms. It was like creating a file that would crash any computer that tried to open it, except this file would be made of actual matter and energy, and the computers trying to open it were galaxy-devouring aliens. The pattern they created was beautiful in its complexity, a crystalline structure that existed simultaneously across multiple dimensions, its atomic bonds arranged in recursive mathematical sequences that would trigger infinite loops in any compression algorithm. But it wasn't just the structure that mattered, it was the timing. "We get one shot at this," Marcus said as they prepared to implement their plan. "If they adapt to this pattern, we won't get another chance." "Then we must ensure our shot counts," Architect replied. "The Nexus has the capability to create millions of these pattern bombs simultaneously and deploy them throughout the galaxy. When the main Devourer fleet arrives, they will encounter them everywhere at once." The next few days were spent in frantic preparation. Using the Nexus's reality manipulation systems, Marcus and Architect created a network of hidden pattern bombs throughout the galaxy. Each one was disguised as a normal celestial object, an asteroid, a comet, a small moon, but contained within its structure were the recursive patterns that would overload any Devourer processing system that attempted to consume it. It was the largest engineering project in galactic history, and it was being executed by a human welder and an ancient AI working together in ways that neither of their species had thought possible. As the main Devourer fleet entered the galaxy's outer rim, Marcus stood in the Nexus's core chamber, his hand resting on Architect's surface, feeling the ancient intelligence's mixture of hope and trepidation. "Ready?" he asked. "As ready as one can be for an undertaking of this magnitude," Architect replied. "Marcus, I want you to know that regardless of the outcome, this has been illuminating. Working with a mind like yours has reminded me why the first builders created me in the first place." Marcus smiled. "Save the sentimental stuff for after we win. Right now, let's show these cosmic garbage disposals what happens when they mess with a galaxy that knows how to fix things." The Devourer fleet spread through the galaxy like a dark tide, consuming everything in their path. But as they began to encounter the hidden pattern bombs, something unprecedented happened. Instead of smooth, efficient consumption, they found themselves facing systems failures cascading through their entire network. The first bomb triggered when a Devourer ship attempted to process what appeared to be a simple metallic asteroid. But as the ship's consumption algorithms engaged, they found themselves trapped in an infinite loop of increasing complexity. The ship's processing power was quickly overwhelmed, then its backup systems, then the shared processing resources it borrowed from other fleet elements. Within minutes, the cascade failure had spread to hundreds of ships. Within hours, entire sectors of the Devourer fleet were locked in processing loops, their consumption capabilities disabled by the very act of trying to consume. From the Nexus, Marcus and Architect watched as their plan unfolded across the galaxy. It wasn't just working, it was working better than they had dared hope. The Devourer's strength, their interconnected processing network, had become their weakness. The pattern bombs were spreading through their system like a virus, each triggered bomb creating failures that triggered others. "It's not just crashing individual ships," Marcus observed with growing amazement. "It's creating a chain reaction through their entire collective consciousness." "The universal buffer overflow," Architect said with what Marcus was learning to recognize as satisfaction. They cannot stop trying to process the patterns because consumption is their fundamental nature, and they cannot successfully process the patterns because we have made them mathematically impossible to compress. The Devourer fleet, which had seemed unstoppable just days before, found itself effectively paralyzed. Ships drifted helplessly as their crews struggled to understand what was happening to their processing systems. Some attempted to purge their networks and start fresh, only to encounter new pattern bombs and crash again. But Marcus knew the battle wasn't over yet. "They'll adapt eventually," he warned. "We need to use this window to set up something more permanent." "Agreed," Architect replied. "And I believe I know exactly what that should be." The paralyzed Devourer fleet hung in space like a collection of dark monuments to their own overconfidence, but Marcus knew better than to celebrate too early. In his experience, the most dangerous moment in any repair job was right after you thought you had fixed the problem. That's when you discovered what you had missed. "Show me their adaptation attempts," he said to Architect as they monitored the enemy fleet from the Nexus. The displays revealed a fascinating and terrifying sight. Individual Devourer ships were systematically purging their processing systems and attempting to reboot with simplified algorithms. They were literally making themselves less intelligent in order to avoid the complexity traps Marcus had set for them. "They're lobotomizing themselves," Marcus observed, "reducing their processing power to levels that can't handle recursive patterns. A crude but potentially effective solution," Architect agreed. "Though it comes at a significant cost, their coordination and efficiency are dropping exponentially." "But they're still Devourers," Marcus pointed out. "Even stupid Devourers are dangerous when there are billions of them." As they watched, the simplified Devourer ships began to move again, but their behavior was noticeably different. Instead of the elegant, coordinated consumption patterns they had displayed before, they now moved like hungry animals, attacking celestial bodies with brute force rather than sophisticated processing. "They've traded intelligence for immunity," Architect observed. "A desperate measure, but one that allows them to continue their primary function." Marcus studied the new patterns, looking for weaknesses they could exploit. But as he watched, he realized something that changed his entire perspective on the situation. "Architect, how long have the Devourers been traveling between galaxies?" "Based on the cosmic background radiation signatures, approximately 65 million years for this particular fleet. 65 million years of perfect coordination, perfect efficiency, and now, in the space of a few days, they've been forced to abandon all of that sophistication." Marcus felt a growing excitement. "We didn't just crash their systems. We forced them to evolve." "I fail to see how that benefits us," Architect replied. "Evolution typically makes species stronger, not weaker." "Not if you force them to evolve in the wrong direction," Marcus said, his mind racing. "Think about it. They've just made themselves dramatically less intelligent. They can't coordinate the way they used to. They can't process complex information. But they're still the same vast fleet trying to consume an entire galaxy." He began pulling up data on galactic resource distribution, stellar formation patterns, and the complex web of gravitational interactions that held the galaxy together. The old Devourers could have consumed the galaxy efficiently, systematically, without destabilizing anything until they were ready. But these new, simplified versions, they're going to make mistakes, big ones. Architect's presence in his mind grew more attentive. "Explain." "They're going to consume too much too fast from the wrong places," Marcus said, his excitement growing. "Look at their new movement patterns. They're going for the biggest, brightest targets first because those are easiest for their simplified minds to identify. But those targets are often the gravitational anchors that hold entire regions of space together." Marcus began running simulations showing what would happen if the Devourers consumed several key massive stars and black holes in rapid succession. The results were dramatic, cascading gravitational collapses that would tear apart their own fleet even as they tried to feed. "They've become their own worst enemy," he breathed. "We just need to make sure they eat the right wrong things in the right wrong order." Working with Architect, Marcus began identifying the critical gravitational nodes throughout the galaxy, massive stellar objects whose consumption would trigger the largest possible disruptions to local space-time. Then they began the delicate process of making those targets irresistibly attractive to the simplified Devourer minds. The strategy was counterintuitive. Instead of hiding important stellar objects, they made them more obvious. Using the Nexus's reality manipulation capabilities, they enhanced the energy signatures of key stars and black holes, making them appear to be the richest, most valuable targets in the galaxy. "This is insane," Resonance observed when Marcus explained the plan to the Council. "Want to help them destroy the most important gravitational anchors in our galaxy?" I want them to destroy the right gravitational anchors in the right order to create a chain reaction that tears their fleet apart, Marcus corrected. It's like controlled demolition. You don't just plant explosives randomly. You study the structure and figure out exactly where to place charges to make the building fall down instead of out. The first phase of the plan went into effect within hours. Devourer scouts, operating with their newly simplified minds, immediately began targeting the enhanced stellar objects Marcus had identified. They saw bright, energy-rich targets and attacked with the straightforward hunger of predators who could no longer think strategically. The first major gravitational disruption occurred when a devourer swarm consumed a carefully selected supermassive black hole that had been serving as an anchor point for a region containing thousands of their ships. The resulting gravitational wave tore through local space-time like a tsunami, destroying hundreds of devourer vessels and scattering thousands more across multiple star systems. Phase 1 successful, Marcus reported as he watched the destruction unfold. They just took out approximately 3% of their own fleet. But the real victory wasn't the ships they had destroyed. It was the chaos they had created. The Devourer fleet, already struggling with their reduced intelligence, found themselves dealing with completely disrupted formations and communication networks. Ships that had been part of coordinated swarms were now scattered across light-years of space, trying to re-establish contact with fleet elements that might no longer exist. The beautiful irony, Architect observed, is that their original intelligence would have recognized the trap immediately. But in making themselves immune to our complexity attacks, they also made themselves blind to our strategic ones. Marcus was already planning the next phase. We've got them scattered and confused. Now we need to keep them that way while we set up the final solution. Final solution? Something the old Devourers could have countered easily, but these new ones won't see coming until it's too late. Marcus pulled up a map of the galaxy, highlighting a pattern of pulsars that formed a rough spiral across several galactic arms. We're going to build a galaxy-wide transmission network. Architect's presence grew puzzled. With trust, Teddy. To what end? Remember how the primitive species defeated the Devourers billions of years ago? They created a pattern of pure randomness and creativity that interfered with the enemy's processing. We're going to do the same thing, but instead of relying on one species, we're going to coordinate every intelligent species in the galaxy. The plan Marcus outlined was ambitious beyond anything previously attempted in galactic history. Using the Nexus as a central hub, they would create a network of quantum transmitters based on naturally occurring pulsars. Each transmitter would be linked to communication systems throughout the galaxy, allowing them to coordinate a simultaneous broadcast from billions of different worlds. A galactic chorus, Architect said, understanding dawning in its ancient mind. Every species, every world, every thinking being contributing to a pattern of such complexity and randomness that no processing system could handle it. But here's the key. The old Devourers could have adapted to it, could have found ways to filter it out or process it in chunks. But these simplified versions, they'll try to consume the entire transmission as raw data, and it'll crash what's left of their processing systems permanently. The next weeks were a frenzy of activity as representatives from every galactic civilization worked to establish the transmission network. It was a project that required unprecedented cooperation. Species that had been enemies for millennia worked side by side to install quantum transmitters and calibrate communication arrays. Marcus found himself serving as both technical coordinator and diplomatic mediator as the project took shape. His background in fixing broken systems proved unexpectedly useful in resolving conflicts between species with incompatible technologies and radically different approaches to problem solving. The Zephyrians want to transmit pure mathematical proofs, he explained to a gathering of project coordinators. The Melody insist on harmonic progressions. The Crystalline Collective is pushing for quantum poetry, and the humans want to broadcast the complete works of Earth's comedians. How do we reconcile such different approaches? asked one of the coordinators. "We don't," Marcus replied with a grin. "That's exactly the point. The more different, the more random, the more incompatible our contributions are, the more effective the final pattern will be." Architect had initially been skeptical of including humanity's contribution to the galactic chorus. Comedy routines? From a species that has barely achieved interstellar travel? "Trust me on this one," Marcus had replied. "Human humor is based on pattern recognition and pattern violation. It's specifically designed to create unexpected complexity from simple setups. Plus, most of our best comedians are essentially professional chaos generators." As the transmission network neared completion, the scattered Devourer fleet was slowly attempting to regroup. Their simplified minds were gradually learning to work around the gravitational disruptions Marcus had created, and their numbers were still overwhelming despite their losses. "We're running out of time," Resonance reported. "Intelligence suggests they're developing new coordination methods that don't rely on complex processing." "Then it's time for the final performance," Marcus said. He activated the galaxy-wide communication system that linked the Nexus to billions of worlds. "This is Marcus Chen, coordinating from the Nexus. All stations prepare for synchronized transmission on my mark." The response was immediate. Across the galaxy, every intelligent species prepared to add their voice to the chorus. Mathematical theorems from the Zephyrians, harmonic sequences from the Melody, quantum poetry from the Crystalline Collective, battle songs from the warrior species, philosophical paradoxes from the contemplative races, and yes, comedy routines from humanity. Remember, Marcus broadcast, this isn't about creating something beautiful or meaningful. This is about creating something so chaotically complex that no processing system can handle it. Let your creativity run wild. Through the Nexus's sensors, Marcus watched as the Devourer fleet began to converge on the galaxy's core, drawn by what their simplified minds perceived as the richest concentration of matter and energy. They had no idea they were flying into the largest information warfare trap in cosmic history. "All stations ready," Architect reported. "The network is stable and synchronized." Marcus took a deep breath. Everything they had worked for came down to this moment. "All stations, begin transmission. Let's give them something to really think about." The galactic chorus began. From billions of worlds, the most creative, chaotic, and complex transmissions ever conceived poured into space. Mathematical proofs that solved and unsolved themselves simultaneously. Musical harmonies that created new forms of beauty while deliberately violating every known principle of aesthetic theory. Poetry that existed in quantum superposition. Jokes that were funny because they weren't funny. Philosophical arguments that proved their own invalidity. And through it all, the raw, creative chaos of billions of minds working together to create something that had never existed before and could never be replicated. The effect on the Devourer fleet was immediate and catastrophic. Their simplified processing systems, designed to handle straightforward consumption of matter and energy, found themselves faced with information patterns of such staggering complexity that they simply couldn't cope. Ships that tried to analyze the transmissions crashed instantly. Ships that tried to ignore them found the signals interfering with their basic navigational and communication systems. Ships that attempted to adapt found themselves caught in recursive loops as their simplified minds tried to process paradoxes and contradictions that had no resolution. But the real genius of the attack wasn't just its complexity, it was its beauty. The transmissions were genuinely creative, genuinely meaningful expressions from billions of thinking beings. They represented everything the Devourers sought to destroy: creativity, diversity, the infinite potential of conscious minds working together. "It's working," Architect said with wonder in its voice. "Their entire fleet is shutting down, not just crashing, actually shutting down. Their processing systems are entering protective hibernation mode to avoid permanent damage." Marcus watched as the greatest threat the galaxy had ever faced simply stopped. Millions of Devourer ships hung motionless in space, their crews unconscious, their systems dormant, their vast hunger finally silenced. How long will they stay down? He asked. Unknown, Architect replied. Their hibernation protocols are designed to wait until the threatening stimulus is removed, but the transmission network is permanent now. As long as the galaxy civilizations continue to think and create and dream, the signal will continue. Marcus felt a profound sense of completion wash over him. They had done it. Not through superior firepower or advanced technology, but through the simple recognition that the universe's greatest strength wasn't order or complexity, it was creativity itself. So what happens now? He asked. Now, Architect replied, we get back to work. There are other galaxies out there, other civilizations that might face similar threats. And I believe you've taught me something important about the relationship between technology and wisdom. Marcus laughed. What's that? That the most sophisticated problems sometimes require the most human solutions. Marcus found himself facing an entirely different kind of problem. The galaxy was safe, but now everyone wanted to know what to do with several billion dormant alien warships floating throughout space. Some of the member species are suggesting we destroy them while they sleep, residents reported during one of the daily council meetings. Others want to study them, and a few are proposing we try to wake them up and attempt communication. Marcus rubbed his temples. Saving the galaxy had been the easy part. Now he had to help decide what to do with the aftermath. What does Architect think? The Architect suggests caution above all else, Resonance replied. The Devourers are not inherently evil. They are simply following their nature. But that nature makes them fundamentally incompatible with creative, chaotic life. Like trying to run a random number generator and a compression algorithm in the same system, Marcus mused. They'll always conflict. Over the past months, Marcus had learned more about the Devourers from analyzing their dormant ships. They weren't monsters or invaders in the traditional sense. They were more like cosmic immune systems, ancient beings from an earlier era of the universe who saw the complexity and chaos of modern reality as a kind of infection to be cleansed. The problem is that they're genuinely ancient, Marcus explained to Sarah during one of his regular calls home to Earth. They remember when the universe was simpler, more orderly. To them, everything that's evolved since then, life, consciousness, creativity, is just noise that needs to be cleaned up. But you can't just eliminate creativity from the universe, Sarah replied. That's like trying to uninvent fire. Try telling them that. To their minds, we're the problem. We're the chaos that prevents the universe from achieving perfect order. It was during one of these conversations that Marcus began to develop an idea that would change everything, not just for this galaxy, but for the cosmic relationship between order and chaos itself. Architect, he said one day as they worked on analyzing the dormant Devourer technology, what if we're approaching this wrong? What if instead of trying to keep the Devourers away from creative species, we find a way to give them what they want, without destroying what we want? I fail to see how both goals can be achieved simultaneously, Architect replied. Order and chaos are fundamentally opposed. Are they, though? Marcus pulled up a holographic display showing the galaxy's current state. Look at what we've built here. Billions of different species working together, sharing technology and culture, creating something more complex and beautiful than any of them could achieve alone. That's not chaos. That's emergent order. I see the distinction, but I do not see how it applies to our situation. Marcus began sketching out his idea in the holographic workspace. What if we could show the Devourers that creativity and complexity aren't the opposite of order? They're a higher form of it. What if we could teach them to appreciate emergent patterns instead of just fundamental ones? You're proposing to educate beings that are billions of years old about the nature of reality? I'm proposing to debug their worldview, Marcus corrected. Think about it. They're operating on outdated assumptions about what order means. They're like a computer program that's optimized for an environment that doesn't exist anymore. The more Marcus thought about it, the more convinced he became that communication, not containment, was the answer. But the scale of the challenge was staggering. How do you explain the value of creative chaos to beings whose fundamental nature was to eliminate it? We'll need volunteers, Marcus said finally. Representatives from every major form of order in the galaxy: mathematical, musical, biological, technological. And we'll need to wake up just one devourer ship to start with. The Council's reaction to Marcus's proposal was mixed, to put it mildly. You want to deliberately wake up one of those things? Asked the representative from the Warrior Caste worlds. They nearly destroyed our entire galaxy, and we stopped them by working together, Marcus replied. Maybe it's time to see if they can learn to work with us, too. The debate raged for weeks. Some species saw Marcus's proposal as brilliant diplomacy. Others saw it as suicidal madness. But eventually, the deciding factor came from an unexpected source: the dormant devourers themselves. Long-range sensors began detecting changes in the sleeping fleet. Their hibernation wasn't as complete as initially thought. Deep within their ships, backup systems were slowly analyzing the galactic chorus that had put them to sleep, trying to understand what had happened to them. They're learning even while unconscious, Architect reported with fascination. Their backup systems are actually studying our transmissions, trying to process them in small, manageable chunks. Which means they're going to wake up eventually anyway, Marcus pointed out to the Council. The question is whether they wake up to find us pointing weapons at them or extending a hand in friendship. The decision was made to attempt communication, but rather than waking a full devourer ship, they decided to start smaller. Using the Nexus's advanced capabilities, they extracted a single devourer consciousness from one of the dormant vessels and created an isolated environment where they could interact with it safely. The first conversation with the devourer was unlike anything Marcus had experienced. The being's thoughts were vast, ancient, and structured in ways that human minds could barely comprehend. But through Architect's translation capabilities, meaningful communication became possible. You are the Chaos Bringers, the Devourer consciousness said when it became aware of its situation. You are the ones who have corrupted the universe with your random patterns. We prefer to think of ourselves as the complexity creators, Marcus replied carefully. We don't bring chaos. We bring new forms of order that emerge from apparent randomness. Order cannot emerge from chaos. Order must be imposed from above, structured according to fundamental principles. Let me show you something, Marcus said, and began transmitting a simple demonstration. He started with a basic mathematical equation, then showed how random variations in its inputs could create fractals of stunning beauty and infinite complexity. The devourer consciousness was silent for a long moment. These patterns, they have structure, emergent structure, Marcus confirmed. Order that arises spontaneously from the interaction of simple rules with random inputs. It's not imposed from outside. It grows from within. Over the following days, Marcus and a team of volunteers from across the galaxy engaged in what was essentially the universe's largest educational project. They showed the devourer consciousness examples of emergent order from every field of knowledge, the spontaneous organization of ecosystems, the evolution of languages, the development of technology, the formation of galactic structures themselves. Slowly, incrementally, the ancient being began to understand that what it had perceived as chaos was actually a higher form of order, one that was more robust, more adaptive, and ultimately more beautiful than the rigid structures it had been trying to impose. Your patterns, they repair themselves, the devourer observed after studying biological evolution. When disrupted, they find new forms of stability. That's what life does, Marcus explained. It doesn't just maintain order, it creates new kinds of order in response to changing conditions. It's like having a repair system that can upgrade itself. The breakthrough came when they showed the devourer consciousness examples of cooperation between different species, how genetic diversity made ecosystems more stable, how cultural exchange accelerated technological development, how the galaxy-wide chorus that had defeated them was actually the ultimate expression of emergent order. "You did not defeat us with chaos," the Devourer said finally. "You defeated us with a pattern so complex and so organized that our simplified systems could not process it. The question is, what do we do with this understanding?" The answer they developed together was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of consuming complex systems to reduce them to simpler ones, the Devourers could learn to participate in them, to become gardeners of complexity rather than destroyers of it. "Think of it as a career change," Marcus suggested. "Instead of cosmic janitors, you could be cosmic librarians, helping to catalog and preserve the infinite varieties of order that emerge throughout the universe." The process of converting the Devourer fleet to their new purpose took years. Each ship had to be awakened individually, its crew educated about emergent order, and its technology repurposed for construction rather than consumption. But gradually, the transformation succeeded. The former Devourers became some of the galaxy's most dedicated protectors and students of complexity. Their ancient wisdom combined with their newfound appreciation for creative chaos made them uniquely qualified to help other civilizations achieve stable, sustainable forms of emergent order. "It's remarkable," Architect observed as they watched a converted Devourer ship helping a primitive species develop sustainable technology. "They have become the opposite of what they were, yet they are still fundamentally themselves." Change doesn't require destruction. Sometimes it just requires seeing the same patterns from a different perspective. But Marcus knew their work was far from over. The universe was vast, and there were other threats out there, forces that couldn't be reasoned with or educated. The Nexus and its human partner would need to remain vigilant. "What's our next project?" he asked Architect. "Long-range sensors are detecting unusual activity in the Magellanic Clouds," Architect replied. "Something is building structures there, massive ones, on a scale that dwarfs even the old Devourer fleets." "Hostile? Unknown. But the energy signatures suggest technology that operates on principles we don't recognize. This may require a different approach than what worked with the Devourers." "Then I guess we better start figuring out what kind of approach it will require," Marcus said, already mentally preparing for their next cosmic repair job. After all, the universe is a big place, and something's always breaking down somewhere. As the Nexus began charting a course toward the Magellanic Clouds, Marcus reflected on how much his life had changed. 6 months ago, he had been a simple welder on an industrial station. Now, he was part of a partnership that spanned millions of years and operated on a galactic scale. But in some ways, nothing had changed at all. He was still fixing things that were broken, still solving problems that seemed impossible, still finding simple solutions to complex challenges. The only difference was the scale. "Marcus," Architect said suddenly, "I want you to know that working with you has been educational. You have taught me that wisdom is not always a function of age or sophistication. Sometimes it comes from simply approaching problems with an open mind and a willingness to get your hands dirty." Marcus laughed. "And you've taught me that even the most advanced intelligence in the universe sometimes needs someone to show them how to turn it off and on again. Shall we go see what's broken in the Magellanic Clouds?" "Let's go," Marcus said. "After all, we've got a reputation to maintain as the galaxy's best repair team." The Nexus began its journey toward their next challenge, carrying with it a human welder and an ancient AI who had learned that the universe's greatest problems often had surprisingly simple solutions, if you just knew where to look. The journey to the Magellanic Clouds took 3 months, during which Marcus had plenty of time to study the strange energy signatures they were investigating. What they found there defied every expectation he had developed about cosmic threats. "They're not building weapons," Marcus observed as they approached the massive structures detected by their long-range sensors. "They're building cities?" The structures were indeed cities, but unlike anything in recorded galactic history, vast crystalline formations that stretched across entire star systems. connected by streams of controlled energy that flowed like rivers of light. The architecture suggested beings of incredible sophistication, but also a profound loneliness. The builders appeared to be a single species, architect reported after analyzing the construction patterns. But I detect no life signs, no communications, no signs of ongoing habitation. Marcus suggested, no. The patterns are too organic, too varied. These structures were built by conscious minds, but those minds appeared to have departed. As the Nexus moved closer to the largest city structure, Marcus began to understand what they were looking at. The buildings weren't just empty, they were memorials. Each one contained crystallized records of civilizations that no longer existed. Entire species preserved in intricate detail within the living crystal matrices. It's a museum, Marcus breathed. Someone is building a museum of extinct civilizations. The first direct contact came when they approached the central structure, a crystalline spire that twisted through several dimensions and appeared to extend infinitely in directions Marcus's mind couldn't quite grasp. A presence touched their consciousness, ancient beyond measure but profoundly sad. "Welcome, children of the spiral galaxy," the presence said. "I am the curator. I preserve what was lost so that it might not be forgotten." Through Architect's translation, Marcus learned the curator's story. It was the last survivor of a species called the Archivists, beings who had dedicated their entire civilization to recording and preserving the history of the universe. For billions of years, they had traveled between galaxies, documenting civilizations, preserving cultures, maintaining the cosmic record of consciousness and creativity. But one by one, my people succumbed to the weight of infinite loss, the curator explained as it showed them through its vast memorial city. To witness the rise and fall of countless civilizations, to preserve their stories while being unable to save them, it became unbearable. My colleagues chose to join the exhibits they had created, becoming one with the eternal record. "And you remained alone," Marcus said, his heart aching for the ancient being. "Someone must maintain the archive. Someone must ensure that the stories are not lost, even if no one remains to read them." As they toured the memorial city, Marcus began to understand the scope of what the curator had accomplished. Entire civilizations were preserved here in perfect detail, not just their histories and cultures, but their dreams, their hopes, their unique ways of understanding the universe. It was the most comprehensive library in cosmic history, and it was tended by a single, impossibly lonely librarian. "The irony is profound," Architect observed privately to Marcus. "The curator has become the ultimate preserver of life and consciousness, yet exists in complete isolation from both." "Yeah," Marcus replied, his mind already working on the problem. "And I bet if we asked, we'd find out that the loneliness is slowly killing them too." Indeed, when Marcus gently probed the subject, the curator admitted that its own existence was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. "The weight of infinite memory without anyone to share it with. I fear I may soon join my people in the eternal archive." "What if you didn't have to be alone anymore?" Marcus asked. The curator's presence flickered with something that might have been hope. "Impossible! I am the last of my kind. There are no others who could understand the burden of infinite preservation." "Maybe not others like you," Marcus said, "but what about others who could help carry the load? What if instead of one being trying to preserve everything, you had millions of beings each preserving small parts?" Marcus's proposal was audacious. Transform the memorial city into a living archive, staffed by volunteers from across the universe who could help share the burden of preservation while learning from the infinite wisdom stored within the crystalline matrices. "Think of it as distributed computing for consciousness," Marcus explained. "Instead of one mind trying to hold everything, you create a network of minds that can share the load and support each other. The archive must be pure, uncontaminated by the perspectives of those who did not witness the original civilizations." "But purity isn't the same as accuracy," Marcus argued. The most accurate historical records are the ones that include multiple perspectives, that show how different minds understand the same events. Your archive would become more valuable, not less, if it included the insights of beings who could learn from these preserved civilizations. Working together with Architect, Marcus began developing a plan to transform the Memorial City into what they called the Living Archive. The crystalline preservation matrices would remain intact, but new systems would be added to allow researchers and scholars from across the universe to interact with the preserved civilizations, to learn from them, and to contribute their own insights to the growing understanding of cosmic history. It would require establishing communication networks across multiple galaxies, Architect pointed out. The technological challenges alone are exactly the kind of problem the old Devourer fleet would be perfect for solving, Marcus interrupted with a grin. They've got the ships, the technology, and a newfound appreciation for preserving complexity instead of destroying it. The project that resulted was the largest construction effort in known cosmic history. Former Devourer ships worked alongside vessels from hundreds of different civilizations to establish quantum communication networks spanning millions of light years. The Curator's Memorial City was expanded into a vast complex of interconnected archives, each one dedicated to different aspects of cosmic history and culture. But the real magic happened when the first research teams arrived and began interacting with the preserved civilizations. The crystalline matrices didn't just contain static records. They contained dynamic simulations that could respond to questions, that could teach and learn and grow based on new information. It's like having conversations with history itself, one of the researchers reported. I can ask the preserved Thenari philosophers about their ethical systems, and they can explain not just what they believed, but why they believed it, how their ideas evolved over time. Marcus watched with satisfaction as the Living Archive grew from a monument to loss into a celebration of the infinite diversity of conscious thought. The curator, no longer alone, found new purpose in guiding researchers and helping them understand the deeper patterns that connected all civilizations across time and space. "You have given me something I thought was lost forever," the curator told Marcus during one of their regular conversations. "Community. Purpose beyond mere preservation. Hope." "That's what humans do," Marcus replied. "We fix things that are broken, and sometimes that includes hearts and souls, not just machines." But even as the Living Archive flourished, Marcus and Architect were already aware of their next challenge. Reports were coming in from the edges of known space about something that defied all previous categories of cosmic threat. "It's not consuming civilizations like the Devourers did," Architect reported as they studied the incoming data. "It's not building monuments like the Curator. It's changing the laws of physics." "Changing how?" Marcus asked. "Entire regions of space are developing new physical constants. Gravity works differently. The speed of light varies. Quantum mechanics operates according to principles we don't recognize." Marcus studied the reports, feeling a familiar mix of excitement and apprehension. Any theories about what's causing it? Several. None of them comfortable. The most likely explanation is that something is experimenting with the fundamental nature of reality itself, treating the universe like a laboratory where different physical laws can be tested and modified. And if they make the wrong modification, not destroyed, not consumed, just changed into something that can't support the kind of life and consciousness we represent. Marcus felt the weight of cosmic responsibility settling on his shoulders once again. But along with the weight came a familiar excitement, the thrill of facing a problem that seemed impossible but probably just needed someone to look at it from the right angle. "Well," he said, settling into his workstation aboard the Nexus, "I guess it's time to debug the universe itself. Where do we even begin with something like that?" Architect asked. Marcus thought about all the problems he had solved over the years: broken machines, corrupted software, failing systems of every kind. The scale was different, but the fundamental approach remained the same. "Same place we always begin," he said. "We figure out what's actually broken, why it broke, and what it would take to fix it. The universe is just another system, right? And every system can be understood if you ask the right questions. And if we're wrong? If this is beyond even our combined capabilities? Marcus smiled, feeling the confidence that came from having solved impossible problems before. Then we'll learn something new about what's possible. But I've got a feeling we're going to surprise ourselves again. As the Nexus began plotting a course toward the regions of altered physics, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him here. A year ago, he had been a simple welder on an industrial station. Now he was part of a cosmic partnership that had saved one galaxy, converted an ancient enemy into an ally, helped a lonely curator find community, and was about to attempt debugging the fundamental laws of reality itself. It was, he had to admit, a pretty good career progression for someone who had barely passed theoretical physics. Ready for another impossible mission? Architect asked. Wouldn't have it any other way, Marcus replied. After all, somebody's got to keep the universe running, and apparently, we're the maintenance crew. The Nexus headed toward the edges of known physics, carrying with it a human welder and an ancient AI who had learned that the universe's most complex problems often had surprisingly straightforward solutions if you just approached them like any other repair job. Behind them, the living archive continued to grow as beings from across the cosmos gathered to share knowledge and learn from the preserved wisdom of countless civilizations. Former devourers worked alongside species they had once threatened, building new connections between distant worlds. The galaxy itself had become a more complex, more beautiful, more robust system than it had ever been before. And at the center of it all was the simple recognition that the universe didn't need to be controlled or conquered or comprehended in its entirety. It just needed to be maintained, improved when possible, and treated with the respect due to any complex system that had taken billions of years to develop. Marcus Chen, welder turned cosmic repairman, was ready to get his hands dirty once again. The galaxy's oldest superweapon went silent. A human welder made it work again. PHT, HFY,